Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's quarterly initiative update related to the FERC Order number 881, Managing Transmission Line Ratings Phase 2 initiative. My name is Isabella Nicosia, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. I'm also joined by our presenter, Raja Tapatabula, Director of Operations Engineering Services, as well as some of our other FERC 881 team members. Before we get started today, I just have a couple housekeeping reminders. So this call is being recorded. The recording is for informational and convenience purposes only. So any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And then if you need technical assistance during the meeting today at any point, you can send a chat to the event producer. Our event producer today is Michelle. We will be taking questions throughout the call today. So if you connected to audio through your computer or use the call me option, you'll need to raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon, which is located at the bottom of your screen. But if you connected to audio outside of the WebEx, then you'll need to press #2 and that will enter you into the question queue. And just a reminder for everyone to please start by introducing yourself by stating your name and affiliation before making your comment or asking your questions so that everyone knows who's speaking. And then you can also send your questions through the chat to me. Again, my name is Isabella Nicosia, or you can send it to all panelists. So the agenda for today, I'm going to hand it over to Raja here in a moment, and we'll get started on the update. We have some updates related to the technical white paper that we published, the comments we received on that paper, as well as some updates related to the progress that's been made in the data submission working group and methodology working group. And then we have some proposed guidance for the proposed changes to the operating procedures that we'll share as well. And then we'll leave some time at the end to cover next steps. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Raja and we'll get started.
Thank you, Isabella. Good morning, everybody. This is Raja Tapatabula. I think, as Isabella mentioned, a lot of work has been going around ISO as well as the RCWS point of view to get ready for this 881 project. This slide, I think we covered quite a lot in a lot of different meetings, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody on the same page what is happening, right? We initiated a public stakeholder process, which is this meeting is part of that. There's a quarterly initiative updates. At the same time, we also created two separate working groups. One is the data submission working group, which is public. A lot of you folks have been attending. There's also a methodology working group. This is, at this point, it's an invite-only group, and most of the RCWS TOPs as well as the CAISO PTOs have been invited to these meetings. And we'll give you a brief update on the status of those working groups, the activities that has been going at those groups as well. Along with that, overall, as we shared, right, we need to get everything ready by July 12th, 2025. We created 3 separate tracks. Track 1 is the real-time reliability applications, right? And that track, again, as we mentioned in a lot of meetings, it covers the real-time component of it, right? Where we expect to receive the real-time instantaneous ambient adjuster ratings through ICCP, and those ratings will be utilized only in our real-time energy management system as well as the RTCA process. So that whole track, I think at this point of time, it's in progress as scheduled. Most of the work has been going as scheduled, targeted by end of this year, Q1 2024. So what does that mean, right? We have the tools ready to receive the data and at the same time process the data and utilize the data in our real-time tools. And then we'll also start testing with the TOPs that are ready. Again, none of this is really required until July 12, 2025, but if some of the TOPs, we are aware that they are ready to send us the real-time data, once we are ready, they can utilize that process to send us the data, which we can use in real-time process. The track 2, again, this is more of a track 2 and track 3. Both of those tracks cover our look-ahead component, which is the 240 hours of data requirement, right, rating requirement that FERC Order 881 requires. So all that data will be acquired to the processes, new tools, new interfaces will be developed, and obviously once we get the data, how do we use those data in our downstream applications like day-ahead markets, real-time markets, all our reliability applications, whatnot. So those 2 tracks will cover in detail all those components of the work. Any questions so far? If not, I can go into the next slide. Next slide, please, Michelle. So again, we covered this in most of the meetings. Again, just to reiterate, we're still getting some questions on how ISO RC West will get the real-time data. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody on the same page. Right, there's the 881 requires minimum utilization of 4 seasonal ratings. That process will work through different components. ISO PTOs will follow the transmission registry process, right? And then RC West TOPs can use the RC West IRO 010 data specification process for us to start using those seasonal ratings. Again, it's not required at this point of time until July 12th, but if some TOPs are ready to utilize those, they can definitely send us the data. The real-time component, right, from both ISO PTOs and RC West TOPs will be acquired through the ICCP. Just want to make sure that everyone on the same page, that we need to work through that. We have some slides that talks about in detail about this, but overall, the real-time, the instantaneous ambient adjusted ratings, if TOPs are ready to send us, they can, once we are ready, they can utilize this process to send us the data. As far as the look-ahead point of view, the 240 hours requirement, the hourly 240 hours of rating component, right, that will be acquired through the new interface. We'll be developing a new interface for that and acquire the data, as I mentioned in the previous slide, using the track 2 and track 3 project schedules. Next slide, please. So as part of the work effort, right, ISO RC West, we have posted a technical white paper that documents in detail our efforts related to the processes and tools implementation, some of the timelines that we mentioned, and some of the work effort related to the working groups. So that white paper talks in detail about that. That is available on our initiative webpage, right? When you click, I'm sure you have access to the slides, and you click on the initiative webpage, you can get there. Next slide, please. We have posted the white paper, and we got some feedback from some of the TOPs. Not a whole lot of feedback, but we got really some of the good feedback we got. Right, the feedback aligns with our goal of achieving alignment between TOs and transmission line rating methodologies. What does that mean, right? Ultimately, as we mentioned in white paper, as we have been talking in different working groups meetings, we like to get a point where there's some kind of alignment across the TOPs on the transmission line rating methodologies. You know, what do we mean by, right? There's different components of it, right? 881 requires everybody to calculate ambient adjusted rating. So to do that, you need to update your rating methodologies and how you want to calculate, right? What type of equipment you want to calculate, and what type of exceptions where you don't want to calculate the ratings, but then you can develop an exception. So, and that is where we want to achieve an alignment across the TOPs. So there's a uniform understanding of what does an exception mean, what kind of equipment we can do an exception, right? As well as what type of seasons. You know, there's different seasons, as we mentioned. There are at least 4 seasons are required. So you can define a alignment between, okay, when is the season start, season end across the footprint. So that is our goal. There's also some questions on more clarification needed for on the rating validation checks. I know we have been talking about, right, we're going to do some basic validation checks on the incoming ratings, and there were some questions on what those basic checks means, right? And in a couple of working group meetings, we did talk about those, and we plan to develop more detailed criteria utilizing the methodology working group. So once we have more details, we'll definitely share with the stakeholder community what those checks are, how those checks are going to look like, and what type of data we need from the TOs to check on the incoming data. Expect to hear more once we get more information from those working groups. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there's 2 different working groups that we are working with the stakeholders, right? The first is the methodology working group, right? And it's an invite only at this point. The last couple of months, we had some really good discussions surrounding what those exceptions are, right? The 881 order definitely talks about exceptions. If the TO does not want to calculate ambient adjusted rating, there's a valid reason why they don't want to calculate. There's a technical reason, right? And that's where the exceptions need to be developed. And we had some good discussion across the TO community what those exceptions could look like. We'll still be working with the group to finalize those, but again, really good discussion so far. right? Again, the NERC 008 standard, right, is the original standard that defines what a TO needs to do to calculate rating on, what the rating constitutes. So 881 does not trump the FAC 8 standard. So FAC 8 standard are still a valid standard to determine what the ratings are. How do you calculate the ratings, whatnot. So it does talk about, some of the limiting equipment, especially the substation thermal equipment, right? Some of those thermal equipment can limit the rating on a transmissional path, right? Even though the conductor is not the most limiting, but you have a wave trap or switch, right, or breaker, whatnot. If those are limiting, then definitely your whole path will be limited by that rating on that thermal equipment. Then that could be an exception, right? I think that's one example. There's also operating conditions, different open breaker conditions, whatnot. And, so those conditions will determine, okay, the most limiting rating will be the breaker rating. That's, and we don't need to calculate ambient adjust rating on those. So that's one example. Next slide, please. So, and there might be other operating limitations, so that will limit the exceptions, right? So again, there might be a lot of different exceptions, so we wanted to have a discussion across the TO community and get an alignment. So I think so far, I think that we see that that's going to take place. Again, at the end of the day, we expect the TOP identify those exceptions and provide those exceptions and document those exceptions in the rating methodology of the particular TOP, and then communicate those exceptions to CAISO RC West. We'll have those exceptions available in an OASIS where TOs can look into that, but again, it's a TO responsibility to calculate, to identify those and send to us. There's also Thailand rating coordination, good discussion on the Thailand rating coordination. It's still quite early on that, right? This is one big effort that's that this working group will be responsible to identify how we could coordinate on a Thailand, right? Especially when you have a neighboring TOs that have completely different methodology right now and different emergency ratings. So how do you coordinate between them, right? And so those are things that we want to get an alignment and across the Thailands and come up with something that works for both the TOs as well as the RC West to manage this in operation. Next slide, please. So that's it so far from the methodology working group point of view. Any questions? I can stop here and then take questions and so far on the activities.
Again, to raise your hand, you can do so by pressing the raise hand icon, which is located at the bottom of your screen. And if you connected to audio outside of the conference, you'll need to press #2.
I do not see any questions in queue.
Okay, then the next slide. This slide covers on the status update on the data submission working group. Again, this is the public working group, right? I'm sure a lot of you folks have attended, right? So far, we have shared some of the draft templates. As I mentioned, right now we are on the track 1, which is a real-time component of it, instantaneous, and most of that data will be received through ISSCP. So we have shared some draft templates that will be utilized to receive this real-time instantaneous ambient adjust ratings through ISSCP. We have also shared some of the procedures that we need to updated. Obviously, the next slide will cover in detail more about what those procedures are, and that's where we are with respect to this data submission working group. At this point, throughout this year, we'll be concentrating on the real-time component of it, right? Once our tools are ready, we'll be developing a timelines to test whatnot, and we'll work with this data submission working group to achieve those. Yeah, so this slide, again, I think this is documented in white paper. At this point, it's our proposed solution for managing this ambient look-ahead ambient adjuster rating, right? And we call it as a managing transmission rating process, line rating process. At this point, right, what we envision, this interface will interface with the TOs to receive the data, where the TOs can actually look into the look into this interface and see what equipment that they need to provide ratings for, and what are the exceptions, whatnot. So there's a lot of activity. Will be this interface will be working with the TO community, the TOP community once we are there. And that interface, we expect that interface to work with all our downstream applications, our reliability application from an RC-based point of view, the market process from a KISO point of view, right? And it will also interface with our model management process, right? And a lot of reports, whatnot, can be generated. That's how we are envisioning this whole process. Once we have more details, once we are ready, finalize, we're pretty close to be finalizing, but once we are ready, we want to finalize some of the formats, some of the data formats, whatnot, how this tool will interface with the TOs. And so before we actually implement anything, we want to finalize those the formats, whatnot, so the TO community can start on their side working developing their tools in preparation, sending this look-ahead component. So just make sure that before we develop something, everybody understand, everybody on the same page. That's our hope. Any questions? If not, I can go into the next slide. So again, as I mentioned, this interface will, right, you can do a lot of different things, right? APIs will be, right, it will have certificate-based authorization, authentication protocol, so that only the right entities can access it, right entities can submit the data, right? As I mentioned earlier, some of the data validations that we talked about, right? Reasonability checks, what does that mean, right? You have a normal rating and 3 different emergency ratings. It needs to be in series, right? In ascending order, right? You don't want your normal rating greater than emergency rating. So those are the checks that we'll be performing from this. At the same time, we also perform some data checks, data validations, like, if you don't want to be at like 10,000 megawatts on a line, right? So as a line rating. So those are things that we'll be checking. We are not going to calculate anything, right? We have mentioned multiple times, right? KISO RC West will not be calculating any ambient interest ratings on our side, so we'll not be performing those checks. So we expect the TO calculate, TO perform most of the major checks. We'll only be doing minor data validation checks. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, I know Trisha is on the call too. She's working with the data exchange working group on some of these draft changes, some of the procedure changes. This procedure RC120, this is our data specification. This is our document that we manage for NERC IR 008 010 data specification process. So again, this sets up how data, the TOP and the BA communicate the data to RC in real time, right? It documents a lot of the stuff, right? And we're going to update this document with these changes that we're proposing for the real-time AAR. So everything will be received through ICCP, right? So obviously we need to have SCADA mapping done, right? If you want to do a SCADA mapping, you need to follow the model upload timeline, the full network model upload timeline, right? You need to create points early ahead so that once you're ready to send the data, you can send the data through us. Trisha, do you want to add anything else on that, on this particular document update?
Yes. So this was, discussed at the RC Data Exchange Working Group, which is a kind of a closed session group. Just that, this requirement actually currently exists in the data specification, but we realize it needs probably some further clarification because we had never fully implemented the functionality. And so what will happen with this is, as we kind of finalize the language on each of these requirements, then we'll post the drafts for review and comment period. And then we'll also have associated documentation in terms of the RC 120, which is the parent document, provides a little bit more description around each of the requirements. And so if further clarification is needed, we'll update that as well. And then we also have multiple guidance documents and other templates and things, which we would be updating the drafts and posting those for review. And so if you can go on to the next slide, we also discussed additional requirements like in the modeling space, which would also need to potentially be clarified, so it's explicit around what our expectations are for the ICCP SCADA mapping, and then the related user guide and checklists and guidance documents would also be updated. So there will be more to come on this, but like I said, we kind of do have the placeholders for this in the existing data specifications. So we'll either look at just enhancing kind of those existing requirements for clarification, and determining, or do we need like a new requirement? And this is for the IRO 10 purposes. For TOP3, what CAISO BA TOP does is we actually take the language from the RC's IRO 10 request, and then we determine if we can just make that same thing applicable on the TOP3 request, which is a CAISO BA 3140, 3140A procedures. And so we would also be posting those TOP3 requests for review and comment before we would finalize. Any questions about that? Okay, thanks, Raja.
Thank you, Tricia. Yeah, I think, as I said, right, once we have more details, we'll definitely share with this group. We are still working on some of the internal tools that will enable us to receive the data, and we can receive the data today, but we cannot utilize the data in our downstream reliability application. So once those tools are ready, we'll definitely work with the stakeholder community and prepare for those, right? Test it and make sure we can utilize the right mappings, right data, right ratings in our reliability application. And I know, again, as I mentioned, it's not a requirement until July 12, 2025. I know, but some of the TO community have been implementing this ambient intensity rating in their system for quite a long time. So we can start utilizing those TO data in our real-time tools.
Thanks, Raja. And I see we got a question in the chat. So regarding slide 15, could the ISO provide some additional context around the maintainers, users, and usages of the Western Interconnection Model Library?
Yes. So they are the BA and TOP customers with RC West. However, also the adjacent reliability coordinators have access to that library as well. So we have, and actually the schedule that we post on that, this is something we probably could clarify in the request. It's actually the same as the schedule that gets posted on the CAISO.com website under the network modeling section. So each year, we put out the model schedule for the next year with all of the cutoff dates and things like that, and then the estimates on when the model would go live. And this would be consistent actually with the schedule that you see on CAISO.com and in that RC portal library.
Patricia?
Are there any other questions? All right.
I don't see any additional questions in queue or on the phone-only line.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Well, that will bring us to our next steps slide. So we will be posting a comments template to the FERC 881 initiative webpage, which is linked here on this slide, and that'll be available by the end of this week. And then comments will be due by end of day, May 25th on today's update. And then you can also submit additional comments or questions related to the implementation efforts related to FERC Order 881 to be considered in a future working group or initiative update meeting to ISO stakeholder affairs at CAISO.com. I do see we have a hand up, so let's go ahead and take Seth's question.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment. This is Seth with DC Energy. I just have a quick question. I had seen that you're going to begin receiving data submissions from the transmission owners. And I guess my question is, if the transmission owners are submitting that and calculating the ambient adjusted ratings, is it possible that CAISO just starts using those before go live for the subset that they start receiving? I was just curious if that was something that was being contemplated.
Yeah, Seth, I think to answer your question, right, again, there are some TOs that can calculate, and a small subset of TOs, again, not all TOs are ready, right? This has been utilized in real time. In fact, we use that even today, even without all these processes, more of a real-time application for RTCA, right? Our energy management system, right? If the TO has a ambient HSE rating available, we do use it. It's a manual process. So that's what this track one will try to automate that process. So if the TOs are ready, they can actually send us that data, and it will be used in our, again, it's only will be used in real-time applications, right? And the market component will come in later. At this point, we don't have the, again, unless we do implement a manual process, there's no way we can implement that in a market-related process, those ambient HSE ratings. Does that answer your question, Seth? But
yeah, I was thinking the manual process. So it sounds like you're not really entertaining. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, for operational emergencies, right? There has been instances if there's a rating available because it's a completely manual. The TO's community the operators have to talk, the engineers have to talk with the TO, right, and identify the right rating, whatnot. That would be used in different applications, but again, it's completely manual, so we don't expect that to be fully utilized without this automation right there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And we received another question in the chat. On slide 11, it states that the ISO provided draft templates. They're just looking to see where they can find those templates.
I think the templates were in our presentations as well, our data sharing working group. It's a public meeting, so I think one of the earlier meetings, definitely they will be there in the PowerPoint presentation. I don't think we have updated, maybe Tricia can correct me, any of our procedures fully yet, and
Correct. Yeah, we'll send out a notice when we have the drafts posted and ready for review. Like the draft procedures, we've got a section on KISO.com where we will post draft procedures for review. So under rules and operating procedures, when there are draft procedures out there, they'll be posted there. But I imagine we'll probably have links from the stakeholder initiatives page when we send the notice out on where those documents are for review. But we don't quite have them yet. And even in there too, we'll also put the effective date. So, the date when the functionality becomes available for the data submission, we want to make sure that that's clear. And then the deadline for kind of the implementation date that'll be in the data specification will actually be the future compliance date. I think as Raja had mentioned, there'll be some entities that might be ready to start submitting right away, and that's great. And then it'll be kind of rolling implementation, and some entities might not be ready until closer to the 2025 deadline. So, but we'll try to make that very clear when we post those drafts for review.
Thank you. There seems to be another question from, I think it's from Diva Zia from San Diego Gas and Electric. Does this order apply to lines that are shared between TOs, of which one isn't under the jurisdiction of FERC? It's a little bit tricky question. If right now we have some entities that does not fall under FERC purview, right? They are deciding not to calculate those ratings, and there are some entities, right, that they're deciding to calculate those ambient HSE ratings, but not to the full 10 days worth of data, right? So it's wide area. So it's completely from no to yeah, we'll do, but not at 10 days. So again, if they decide, the TO decides they're not under the jurisdiction of FERC and not calculate those ratings, we don't expect them to. We're not going to force them to calculate those, and we plan to have those equipment under an exception list, so everybody can actually see, right? It's available to everybody from right, who has access to. They can look into that and see which lines are not being calculated for. Does that answer your question, Diva? Okay, good. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other questions before we conclude for today? Michelle, any questions over the phone only line?
No, I do not see any questions in the phone only queue.
Okay. All right. Well, then that concludes today's update. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.